Welcome to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast, your guide to future tech trends and innovation in a language you understand. Now, over to your host, Neil Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. Now, a big apology for the gap in episodes this week. I'm afraid disaster broke at the Fun Palace here in the UK. A leak ensured we had a big hole in the ceiling, and much of the week involved getting a plumber out to track and trace the source of the leak. And then there was a decorator that was needed to sort the cosmetic stuff out and fix that nasty hole in the ceiling. Now that meant that a few episodes were cancelled, and I have over 10 episodes to record this week that were rescheduled. And my tiny mind might just explode. But hey, this is my true calling in life, so no complaints on my watch. And one of the many reasons I love doing this show is hearing stories around how technology is transforming industries and areas I didn't even know existed as I just walk around this planet in my own little world. I mean, for example, Jit Jat Joe yesterday was solving the problems of temporary staff and how when we go to those big venues, those big restaurants, we seldom think about the temporary staff solutions behind the scenes. But today's guest takes it one step further. Now, Tony Atti, he's the CEO that is revolutionizing the 100-year-old refrigeration industry. And ultimately, the way we cool everything from soda to flu vaccine to even fibre optic cables. Now, today's cooling technologies are seriously uncool. So hospitals, pharmacies and grocery stores, these all rely on dated refrigerated systems that also depend on bulky compressors, noisy fans and also cause harmful emissions. In a nutshell, these systems are simply not fit for a modern world. So to solve this problem, Tony took to a route that no one would even consider: semiconductor technology. Today, his company, Phononic, is a $158 million venture-backed company with major investors including Tony Fadell, Jenny Lee. Now, Phenomics has also been a CNBC Disruptor 50 company for 2 years running now, and it's an inspirational story, and I'm convinced it will make you think about a few areas you probably take for granted and seldom think about. So buckle up and hold on tight, and I will beam your ears all the way to North Carolina so we can speak with Tony Atti from Phononic. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Tony. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name is Tony Atti. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Phononic, headquartered in Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina. Originally from upstate New York, my career has now spanned almost 15 years in energy or energy technology. I like to say first as a very average research and development scientist with a PhD out of the University of Southern California. My passion really came in the world of venture capital and entrepreneurialism, where I did a stint in New York City as a venture capital investor, and now the last 11 years in my most favorite position as an entrepreneur, leading or building venture capital-backed technology companies.
Now, when I've been researching you guys, what stands out straight away is your unrivaled approach to that solid-state cooling and how it's breaking boundaries of semiconductor innovation, all to deliver unprecedented performance and sustainability right across the globe. But for anyone listening to us now that's hearing about you guys for the very first time, could you just describe what your technology is and also expand on what problems you solve and what makes you guys unique from all those other solutions out there?
So we sometimes joke the first thing people ask us about is our funny name, Phononic. And I often say, if you're a physicist, you would think it's really cool. But the investment thesis behind Phononic is we're really trying to replicate the transformative impact that semiconductor, or as it's often called, solid state innovation has had on our way of life. Silicon Valley is famously built on the impact that semiconductors have had on data, communications, solar, most recently LED lighting. But in the world of cooling and heating and refrigeration, where you're trying to move phonons, hence the name of our company Phononic, we're very much unchanged in that we're 100 and some odd years in, and very inelegant solutions like compressors, heat sinks, and fans are still the legacy incumbents. And Phononic was launched to transform that industry of almost $30 billion in global impact using semiconductor innovation in much the same transformative way where it's been used elsewhere. And that's a daunting task that saw us tackle efficiency, scale, manufacturability, and cost, all of which would be needed to compete and make an impact in that space. We're now 9 years in and starting to have a dramatic effect.
Now, I love the fact that your company is tackling today's cooling technologies, which, let's be honest, are seriously uncool. So one of the reasons I love recording this show is because I get to hear about problems that I've never even considered. So, for example, hospitals, pharmacies and grocery stores all rely on dated refrigeration systems that depend on bulky compressors, use noisy fans and also cause harmful emissions. So a system's simply not fit for the modern world. I think that's something that we can all agree on. But this is a problem on a huge scale, isn't it? I mean, can you tell me more about that issue and how it's impacting so many different industries out there?
Well, the first thing that makes Phononic exciting is once you understand the technology and its capabilities and you start to segment the market, you really start to touch almost every part of our way of life, both professionally, commercially, and industrially. But what surprised us continually is despite the diversity of markets that we could go after, the thermal needs tend to be very common. That's the first step. But the second, more surprising one is despite working with some of the most sophisticated companies in the world, changing the way data is communicated, standard of healthcare is provided, how food is protected and stored, the underpinning for all from a thermal refrigeration or thermal management perspective is the dependency upon antiquated solutions that really cause you to scratch your head. The fiber optic communications that drive the massive amount of data consumption in this world are most often cooled by blocks of aluminum or copper. Nurses have to take nursing mothers out of their rooms with their children because to store their breast milk side by side with the baby requires a compressor-based refrigerator that when it duty cycles, the vibration or the noise disturbs the baby. And you have to often find your cold or frozen produce buried in the back of a store because every time a grocer tries to distribute those cooling solutions elsewhere, it tends to negatively impact other perishable goods around it. So when we look at where we can apply our solid state innovation, we marvel at the antiquated manner in which cooling and refrigeration has been provided before, and it's often in areas that you just take for granted because you're just not looking.
Now, I love how to solve that huge problem. You took a route that no one else would even consider, which was semiconductor technology. So can you tell me more about the story behind taking that route and how it also led to the creation of Phononic?
Well, as someone who spent his career in R&D, venture capital, and then entrepreneurialism, we like to think this is what venture capital is supposed to do. When Phononic was first launched in late 2008, it was almost done on a dare, where two of my founding investors at Venrock and Oak Investment Partners, almost as a favor, asked me to investigate why semiconductors hadn't had a transformative impact in cooling and heating like they had done in those other markets I previously mentioned. That took me to some of the most respected academic research institutions around the country, frankly, around the world, and we started to piece together a story where universities that were touching different parts of the problem but not necessarily collaborating with one another, we put that story together, which brought us to the University of Oklahoma, Caltech, University of California at Santa Cruz. And when we started to piece those partnerships together, we believed we had a technology that would ultimately become a product roadmap that could address that efficiency, scale, manufacturability, and cost that was needed. So it was really an elegant story where we brought groups from around the academic, government, and venture capital spectrum, brought them together, ultimately headquartered our company in North Carolina around 2011, and are now well onto our way in terms of productizing that first technical concept we thought of way back then.
So am I right in saying that as a result of thinking differently and using that technology, you're already changing the way drugs and vaccines are stored, data is transmitted over fibre optic cables, and food and beverages are sold, stored and transported? Is that right?
We're in the market. If you look at the timeline of Phononic from 2009 through 2012, we were very much a chip company, perfecting our advances at the material science and the semiconductor device level. But where we really started to take off was in 2013 and 14. We started to productize that chip level innovation in finished goods. We've now shipped in the last 18 months almost 2 million components to some of the most sophisticated fiber optic customers around the world who are using our chips to cool their most sophisticated optical component communication parts. In life sciences and healthcare, we're quickly becoming the standard of care in hospitals and clinics, now with an announced partnership with Thermo Fisher Scientific, one of the leading brands in life sciences and healthcare. And last fall, in this quarter, we're rolling out a series of disruptive products in food and beverage to grocery and retail channels. So this has now become very real, very quickly, and we're now as a company starting to speak in terms of market share as opposed to just technology demonstration.
Now, we often hear the criminally overused phrase disruptor, but you seem to be doing just that with your company. And you are, I mean, let's face it, you are defying the limitations of semiconductor technology to disrupt the healthcare, food and beverage industries there. But, I mean, how do you come to the decision to target those specific markets? And also, how is it being received? I mean, did you struggle to get anybody to believe you at first when you went in with the pitch?
It's a constant struggle. So, a challenge for a young company like ours in the transition, candidly, that we're going through is one from defense to offense. If you look at many of the products on our roadmap, particularly over the last 18 months, while the economics and the value proposition is exciting, I don't mind telling you and your listeners that those products were more often chosen to quiet a skeptic. You can't get cold. All right, we'll build a fridge. You can't operate in a demanding environment. Okay, let's take down hospitals. You can't distribute your cooling. Okay, grocery stores are next. So more often than not, disruptive companies tend to establish a defensive shell where the incumbents have been around for so long, and it's so hard to change behavior that without being too dramatic, we sometimes have to go to the playground right up to the bully and punch him right in the nose to get his attention so that people can understand we're for real. But once that's done, and we have a lot of discussions like this at our board and with our investors, how do you know you're being disruptive? And we tend to quantify it at Phononic on both emotional and tactical terms. Emotionally, we're changing the user experience that people never thought they'd have with the products that keep their sensitive goods cold or frozen. We hear it from nurses. We hear it from grocery store managers. We hear it from optical engineers. But also, tactically, you know you're disruptive when user behavior starts to convert over to your technology and it discontinues the use of the legacy incumbent. And we're now seeing evidence in both of those areas.
Now, we're also seeing a lot of upheaval in the food and beverage industry these days, especially with online and delivery services bringing those huge changes and increased competition to the conventional grocery store landscape. So in your opinion, I mean, what's happening in the market right now, and what role do you see your technology playing in that industry as it continues to evolve too?
Well, there's really two areas of upheaval that we're seeing. One is on the retail model amongst competitors, and the second is the retail model within a particular competitor. And as I break that down, the challenge for a company like ours when you're trying to articulate your value proposition is you're sometimes surprised. So if you take the first example of competition amongst the retail and convenience store space, and you look at our products, the ability to displace that compressor adds almost 40% more storage capacity in the same physical footprint that you would otherwise have in the product itself. That translates into a dramatic operational cost savings because you no longer need to service the equipment because we're more reliable, and you less frequently have to stock it because we can carry more inventory in the same physical footprint. And when there's such competition amongst retail providers, the ability to save on the operational support, maintenance, and stocking of the equipment translates to the bottom line amongst that competition. On the flip side, there is incredible brand competition within the store. And when you think of goods that are refrigerated or frozen, they all tend to be clustered in the back of the store, making brand awareness, brand promotion a real challenge for those consumer goods. Well, here, when you look at our products, not only do you have more inventory, but it's quiet, there's no vibration, and there's no waste heat. So you can now put our products closer to the actual point of sale. And all of our user data, all of our engagement with the channel tells us that consumers would like to purchase cold and frozen goods nearer the checkout, but they can't. So when you look at the upheaval you mentioned, whether it's operational savings in delivering refrigerated or frozen goods, or whether it's promotional revenue opportunities and better placing refrigerated or frozen goods, we're excited about our value proposition in both.
Now, we will have a lot of people listening that are either CEOs, entrepreneurs, or in charge of their own startup and their own startup journey and the challenges that they're facing. And I do like to try and learn from each other on this show. So what are the hardest things that you're finding and your biggest challenges about running a tech company of your size at the moment?
Well, that's a great question. And now with a company of in excess of 100 people, manufacturing operations in North Carolina, product assembly operations in Texas and China, it can be a daunting task. I think one of the biggest challenges for an entrepreneurial company is recognizing that the same team that was so critical in technology demonstration that gives you that validation that the skeptics need to see is not always the same team that can then take that innovation, scale it, ramp it for production, and deliver it to the market. So philosophically, as an entrepreneur, being honest with yourself and with your team in terms of recognizing the different skill sets required for growth is a real challenge, because those people, you feel a sense of loyalty because they were the ones that ultimately put you on the map. Yet you have a fiduciary responsibility to grow your business, not just for your investors, but for those people that got you there. So recognizing that tasks, challenges, and people change over time is probably the biggest structural challenge for an entrepreneur and a CEO as they build their enterprise. I think the second piece that's related to that puzzle is when you add talent, you're often moving so fast, so quickly, and the needs are so dramatic that you'll just stick what we call a warm body in any open position just so you can fill a slot on your org chart. That can have a demoralizing effect on the people that are already there if they don't see your commitment to bring in the absolute best to perform a given task. So recognizing that the needs of an organization change over time and trying to stay in step with or ahead of that transition is probably the biggest challenge I've seen Phononic face, but also my peer entrepreneurs in the industries that I follow.
Now, Phenomics also has a very interesting funding story, having secured nearly 160 million in venture-backed funding, much of which came from a major Silicon Valley investor. So can you tell me more about the story behind this success, and where were some of the biggest challenges that you faced, and how did you overcome them?
Well, we had a bit of a competitive advantage up front, and then I had at least been in and around the venture capital and institutional investment world. So I was in tune with the kind of return profile and growth profile that the venture community was interested in. What's a bit ironic is of the 160 million that we've raised, much of which has come from Silicon Valley and global investors, we've done it with a semiconductor hardware company headquartered in North Carolina. So what I try and tell entrepreneurs as we've raised capital is to be less concerned with where you are, less concerned with the expectations of what you think venture capital investors do or don't want to hear, and instead articulate a wealth creation vision for the company you want to build. Demonstrate the value creation steps needed to get there, and you'd be surprised at how the money will follow. Too often, entrepreneurs look at the raising of capital as a value creation event. Neil, it's not. The raising of capital is the recognition of a value creation event, and it sets the expectation for more. And if you can articulate how that value will be achieved, what value it creates for your shareholders, and the capital needed to get there, I'll never say that it makes the fundraising process easy, but it makes it certainly more straightforward. And we're very proud of the global investor syndicate we put together that share that vision. Perhaps the one piece I will add that is a second point of pride is, as a semiconductor hardware company operating in a world of software, investors will support companies that manufacture and make finished goods and products. That just has to be factored into the value proposition. And you mentioned disruptive. We learned very early on that simply prototyping something and expecting the world to adopt it wouldn't be enough. And a majority of the capital we've raised has been to productize what we've done so that disruption can be made real.
So what are the top three things that you're working on at Phononic at the moment, and your vision for the following year and beyond?
Well, we're much more disciplined and structured than we might have been. I mentioned defense versus offense before, where there was a bit of randomness to the markets that we were picking that wasn't always driven by economics or market research. It was more often driven by skepticism and overcoming those skeptics. But now we're focused really on three core markets that draw from either our chip or our fully integrated product portfolio. And that is optical components or optoelectronics. That supports our big data customers. There's life sciences and healthcare, which delivers finished products to medical, healthcare, pharmacy, and life sciences. And the newly emerging food and beverage delivers those similar distributed products to convenience grocer and consumer product companies. And those draw from that innovation at the chip, system, or fully finished product level. And then we've got certainly a skunkworks program that we run in the parallel where we're taking a very excited look at how we can apply our solutions in the areas of climate control and air conditioning. But that's a development project right now internally.
So what is the one piece of advice that you could offer any other CEOs listening at the moment?
One piece of advice is hard. I'd say, if I had to drill it down, if you believe in the value proposition of your technology, product, or service, persistence is a trait you must master. That's a very outward bound piece of advice I'd give them in terms of it's challenging to take on an industry, investors, and persistence is really something required. But if I could add just one other piece that builds your persistence is how you communicate with your team. Too many CEOs that I know, given the trials of what we do for a living, communicate to their team through a mandate of their job where you're effectively telling people what to do because of rank. That will work, but it's temporary. And what we've preached at Phononic is we tend to communicate through inspiration, which simply means we explain to our team why we're doing what we're doing. And when you can explain that and they understand where you're trying to take the company, everybody's collective persistence gets a lot easier.
Well, a huge thank you for coming on today. Before I do let you go, could you just remind the listeners of your website URL for Phononic, social channels, and also how they can reach your team if they've got any questions about our conversation?
Sure. To learn more, you can find us at phononic.com. We're also on Twitter with @PhononicRTP, as well as pages on LinkedIn. And personally, I always try and make as much time as I can for entrepreneurs who have questions or interest in our company, and they can follow me at Anthony Atti and message me directly there, which I check frequently.
Well, I love how you guys have been revolutionizing the 100-year-old refrigeration industry and the way you call everything from soda to flu vaccines and fiber optic cables completely under my radar. You know, and it's a fantastic thing that you're doing. But a big thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it, for sharing your story today.
Neil, thank you for having us.
What a great story there. I mean, I'm so grateful that Tony came on to share his story because it really opened our eyes, I think, to how his company is defying the limitations of semiconductor technology to disrupt industries such as healthcare, food and beverage, and so many more. And I also love how he defied his critics to revolutionise the 100-year-old refrigeration industry and the way we call everything from soda, flu vaccines, and even fibre optic cables. As a $158 million venture-backed company with major investors that has been a CNBC Disruptor 50 company for 2 years running, it's clear that he's doing something right. And for me, I think we all read on a daily basis about those next big things, the shiny tech solutions that fix problems that don't even exist yet. But what makes Phononic stand out is that it is fixing a real world problem. Now, to some, it might not sound the sexiest of subjects, but upgrading the 100-year-old refrigeration industry that is no longer fit for purpose, that's something that our critical infrastructure relies on every single day. So if you're on your own startup journey, I think the best lesson I took from today's episode is that we need to think less about the shiny technology or the marketing behind it and get busy fixing real world problems and removing those pain points. That is where the value is. But hey, that's just me getting on my soapbox again. Let me know your thoughts. You can tweet me at Neil C. Hughes, email me directly at techblogwriter@outlook.com, or even go to my website, techblogwriter.co.uk/podcasts, and you can leave me a message there and listen to every single one of our episodes. But we're about out of time, and I've got another 10 episodes to record this week, so I'm going to skedaddle and get out of here. But I'll be back tomorrow. So a big thank you for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thanks for listening to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. Until next time, remember, technology is best when it brings people together.